The wind stretched across the prairie like a sigh, dragging dust behind it. The dirt road wound through acres of frostbitten grass, past fences sagging under the weight of years, and toward a ranch house where one lantern glowed against the falling dark. That's where the girl stopped, 9 years old, her boots too big and laces frayed, standing beside a woman with a baby tied to her back and the look of someone who buried hope a long time ago. The girl held a folded paper with the word river scratched in her father's trembling hand. She didn't know if it was a man or a place, just that it was the last thing he whispered before his eyes lost their fire that morning. He died on a patch of land where no one came when you screamed. No undertaker, no preacher, just the wind. They'd walked all day, her mother refusing to cry, refusing to stop. The baby had not made a sound since noon. The mule had gone lame and been left behind. Everything there was tied to their backs or buried in a shallow grave by a creek with no name. The ranch looked ordinary, not rich, not ruined, just there, a porch sagging like a tired shoulder, smoke trailing from the chimney, a few chickens pecking near the barn like they didn't notice the ache in the air. The girl tugged at her mother's sleeve. What if he says no? Her mother didn't answer. She just walked up the 3 porch steps, every one sounding like a hammer blow. She knocked with the side of her fist, gently, like she was afraid to wake something angry. No sound came for a long while. Then the door creaked open. A man stood there, backlit by warm light, his face lined with time and sun. He wasn't young, but he wasn't old either. He was tall, and there was something in his eyes that didn't move, like he saw everything but didn't flinch. The mother spoke low, her voice worn out from miles and mourning. "My daddy died today," she said, barely louder than the wind. "Can we sleep in your barn tonight?" The man looked at them, at the girl's red cheeks, the blanket clinging to the baby, the woman's boots covered in dust and dry blood. He didn't ask questions. He stepped aside. "Welcome inside," he said. The girl blinked. She hadn't expected that. Neither had her mother. They stepped in, and the warmth struck their skin like a memory. A fire burned in the hearth. The smell of baked beans and with smoke filled the air. The room was plain, table, chairs, shelves lined with jars, but it looked like heaven. The man shut the door, didn't speak much, just handed them each a folded towel and pointed to a corner where they could dry off. The girl noticed his hands were rough, like he worked wood or hauled rope all day. His shirt was patched at the elbow. He moved like someone used to silence. He ladled food into bowls without asking names. Her mother tried to refuse, but her lips were trembling and the baby had begun to cry. They ate at the table, quiet, careful. The girl watched the fire. Her mother's spoon shook in her hand. After dinner, the man took out a quilt and laid it near the hearth. He made no speeches. He just made space. The girl curled up beside the baby and watched her mother's shoulders rise and fall. She noticed how her mother kept glancing toward the man, as if waiting for him to take something, ask something, do something cruel. But the man just sat in the old rocking chair, sipping something warm, staring into the flames. He didn't smile, but he didn't frown either. He looked like someone carrying a weight too familiar to speak of. When the girl woke in the middle of the night, the fire was low but still burning. The man hadn't moved from his chair. Only now, he held something in his lap, an old photo or maybe a letter. His hand trembled, just once. By dawn, the snow had started to fall, thin flakes drifting like feathers. The mother stood outside in borrowed boots, staring at the empty pasture. The girl watched her from a window. She looked like someone trying to remember how to breathe. The man stepped outside and said nothing, just stood beside her. 2 silhouettes in the morning light. Eventually, her mother spoke. "He told me this name," she said, just before he passed. Said maybe the man at this ranch would help. Didn't say why. "Who was he?" the man asked. "My husband. He had good in him. Just no luck. The fever took him in 2 days. Left us with nothing but that name." The man nodded once. "I didn't know him," he said. "But if he sent you here, I reckon I'm supposed to help." Her mother turned to him. "We'll work for it. Chop, so clean, anything. We're not beggars." He didn't argue, just said, "The coop needs mending." They started that day. The girl helped her mother scrub the floor, then followed the man outside while he fed the animals. He gave her a bucket and showed her how to scatter seed. She tried to copy the rhythm of his step. He didn't talk much, but when she dropped the bucket and spilled everything, he only knelt beside her and started again. That night, the girl drew a picture with a nub of charcoal and the corner of a feed sack, a house with smoke, a big man with a hat, a small girl with braids. She gave it to him after supper. He stared at it longer than she expected. Then he got up, walked over to the mantel, and pinned it there with a sliver of kindling. Her mother watched all of it without a word, but something in her shoulders changed. Just a little. Later that week, a man came riding up the trail, dusty coat, hat low, mouth full of warnings. He'd heard there was a widow squatting on land that wasn't hers. Asked if the rumors were true. The rancher didn't raise his voice. Just stepped out on the porch, rifle resting against the post. "This land's mine," he said, "and everyone on it is under my roof." The rider scowled but turned back down the trail. The girl watched from the window, heart pounding. That night, her mother stood at the sink, scrubbing dishes in silence. The rancher walked past her on the way to the barn. She stopped him with a question she hadn't meant to ask. "Why did you let us in?" He didn't look at her when he answered. "Sometimes a barn's just not enough," he said. "Sometimes folks need fire." He stepped out into the dark. She watched him go, hands still in the water. The baby stirred in the next room. The girl was already asleep, one arm around a quilt, like it was stitched from peace. The fire cracked once in the hearth. Sparks lifted like prayers into the chimney. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, something else had started to settle, something like belonging, or the first breath after drowning. By morning, the barn door would swing open with new sound, the sound of hands beginning again. The frost came early that year. Thin white lace clung to the edges of the fence posts and crept up the window panes, blurring the line between inside and out. By morning, the girl was up with the chickens, trailing behind the rancher in boots still too big, dragging a dented pail across the frozen ground. He didn't speak much, but he showed her where to throw the feed and how to gather eggs without cracking them. She learned to move quiet, to watch the animals the way he did, like they had stories of their own. Her mother rose, kept to the house. She swept with stiff arms, washed clothes with red, chapped hands, patched shirts that didn't belong to her. No one asked her to. No one stopped her either. Work gave her shape again. Every scrub of the floor felt like scrubbing away the memory of the place they'd left behind. The grave by the creek. The baby's wail unanswered for hours while she dug. She didn't speak much to Thomas Rivers, not beyond necessity. But there were glances, brief, unreadable glances, like two folks walking a narrow path and wondering if the other might fall. At dusk, she sat on the porch and watched the horizon fold into night. Sometimes he brought her coffee, strong and bitter, in a chipped mug. He never stayed long, just nodded and walked off to finish whatever chore dust demanded. But it was something, more than silence. The girl, Emma, became a fixture. She chased the hens, shadowed Thomas through the fields, asked about every tool in the shed. He never told her to hush, never looked bothered by her company. He'd answer her questions in that same slow, gravel-soft voice. "That's a post-hole digger." "What's it for?" "Digging holes." She'd laugh, and sometimes his mouth would twitch into something that almost resembled a smile. The baby, Eli, grew louder, healthier. The warmth and meals and quiet seemed to fatten him. He clung to Rose like a second skin, but when Thomas entered the room, the child would reach toward him, small fingers grasping at air. Thomas would always pause, just for a second, before continuing past. It wasn't a home. Not yet, but it wasn't a stopgap either. Rose began building something behind the barn. Not a house, not even a proper shelter, just a lean-to with a slanted roof and 2 sturdy posts. Her hands bled from the work, but she never asked for help. She borrowed tools in silence, hammering with a rhythm that seemed to hold her grief at bay. One afternoon, the wind rose sharp and sudden. The girl was down by the creek. The lean-to swayed once, then collapsing on itself. Rose stood over it, fists clenched, jaw locked, eyes shining with unshed fury. Thomas came walking from the pasture. He stopped beside her, boots crunching frost, and surveyed the ruin. "You built it wrong," he said. She didn't answer. He handed her a fresh board. "Start again." That night, she didn't cry, not even when she scraped splinters from her palm. She worked until her muscles shook, and when she sat by the fire, she stared at the flames like they owed her something. Thomas sat across from her, whittling a piece of pine. It wasn't anything in particular, just a shape forming under his knife. She watched his hands, the way they moved slow and certain, and wondered how long it took for calluses to feel like skin. She asked, "How long have you been alone?" He didn't look up. Long enough not to count. He didn't ask about her past. He didn't ask why her husband died, without a name worth mentioning. But something shifted in the room after that, like the air had softened or the silence between them had started listening. Days blurred into a pattern. Morning chores, midday repairs, evening quiet. Emma drew pictures and pinned them to walls. One day she drew a picture of all four of them, herself, Eli, her mama, and Thomas, standing beneath the sun. She handed it to him with pride. He stared at it longer than she expected. "You drew me too tall," he muttered. "No, I didn't," she said. "That's how you look when you open the door." He didn't reply, but that night he tucked the drawing inside the pages of an old book on the shelf, as if it were something fragile. The trouble started the next morning. A man rode in from town, mud caked on his boots, a thin scar dragging down one cheek like a misplaced river. His horse was nervous. His eyes were mean. He didn't tie the horse before stepping onto the porch. Just walked up like he had business here, and didn't expect to be refused. Thomas met him at the door. "Rivers," the man said. "Name's Calder. I come from Jasper Boone." Thomas narrowed his eyes. "What does Boone want?" Calder flicked his eyes toward the barn, where Rose stood chopping wood. "Says a widow come through owing him. Says she's squat in. Says she's got no claim on nothing. Mule's his. Tools too. Even the boy, by some law I don't rightly understand." Thomas didn't blink. "She ain't squatting. She ain't married neither. That makes her goods up for reclaiming. Debt's a cruel thing, Rivers. Boone's just collecting what's his." Thomas stepped off the porch. The boards creaked under his boots. Calder reached for his coat, where a pistol shape bent the fabric. But Thomas didn't flinch. Just walked until there were only 2 feet of frozen ground between them. "She's under my roof. Try to touch her, and you'll leave with less than you came with." Calder grinned, a yellow slash across his face. "She ain't yours." "Not yet." It hung in the air like a gunshot, louder than any curse. Calder stepped back. The grin faded. He mounted his horse, spit once into the dirt, and rode off without another word. Rose had seen all. From the woodpile, she stood frozen, breath ghosting out in front of her. Her hands clutched the axe handle, so tight her knuckles were white. Later, after the sky went dark and the house fell quiet, she found him outside the barn, mending the fence line. She stood there a long time before speaking. "What did you mean, not yet?" He didn't look up, just kept twisting wire through the post. "Only meant what needed saying. You think marrying me solves it?" "No. I think standing by and letting Boone take what's left of your dignity solves nothing." She stepped closer. "I don't want saving. I'm not offering that. I'm offering ground under your feet, the kind that holds steady." He finished tying the wire, stood up slow. They were close now, the kind of close that didn't feel rushed, just real. "I ain't a man of many things," he said, "but when I say someone's under my roof, I mean it. You and your children, you belong somewhere." She looked away. Her breath caught. "I never belonged anywhere before." "You do now." The night hung still around them. The barn let out a soft creak. Somewhere a rooster stirred too early. She didn't cry. She just nodded once like signing something sacred, then turned and walked back toward the house. He watched her go, the moonlight catching the strands of hair that had slipped from her braid. And when he finally looked up at the stars, he didn't see the cold. He saw a beginning, a step, then another. The storm rolled in heavy and unhurried, like it had come for something and didn't plan on leaving without it. Clouds stacked low in the sky, thick as wool, pressing the air flat over the prairie. By mid-afternoon, the wind picked up and the barn doors slammed like rifles, the hinges crying out under their weight. Thomas moved through it all with quiet certainty, securing shutters, nailing down loose boards, guiding the animals inside without a word. Emma stayed close, her little hands holding tight to the baby, who whimpered now and then at the rising howl outside. Rose stood at the window with a rag in one hand, but she'd long stopped wiping the glass. Her eyes were fixed far beyond the fields, her jaw clenched like someone bracing for more than wind. The letter came just before the sky cracked open. The writer wore a government badge and the expression of a man who'd long since buried his sympathy. He handed the envelope to Rose with 2 fingers and a nod that wasn't unkind, but wasn't kind either. Then he turned his horse and vanished into the hiss of oncoming rain. Rose didn't open it right away. She carried it to the kitchen table and set it down like it might bite. The baby stirred in the cradle. Thomas glanced at the letter once, but didn't ask. She opened it slowly, careful not to tear. Her eyes moved line by line, shoulders rising higher, breath turning shallow. She read it twice, then lowered it to the table, and walked outside without a word. Thomas followed. She didn't make it far, just to the lean-to she'd rebuilt with bare hands and stubborn will. She stood beneath the half-finished roof, the hammer still hanging from a bent nail. When she spoke, her voice came low and level, but it carried all the way to him. They want to take everything. He didn't interrupt. The mule was collateral. The tools, even the blankets from our wagon. He owed more than he told me. He was going to fix it, he said, once he got strong again. But he never did. Just gave me a name and left the rest to rot. She turned him now, the rain beginning to needle down, fine as pins. They say I have no legal claim to anything. They can seize the children, place them in state care if I can't prove a permanent residence. No deed, no husband, no right. She laughed once, bitter and small. Funny, isn't it? My whole life I've tried to make things stick. Love, work, family. But nothing stays. Not even my name seems to belong to me anymore. He stepped forward. Rain already soaked through his sleeves, but he didn't care. You've built more with nothing than most do with everything. And it still won't be enough. He looked at the lean-to, the crooked beam she hadn't fixed yet. Looked back at her. What if I give you my name? She blinked. You mean Mary? It's a word, he said, but it changes things. Paper, law, protection. Boone can't claim your boy. The courts can't take your girl. And the house becomes yours just as much as mine. You don't even know me. I know the way you fight. I know the way your daughter draws the world better than it is. I know the sound of your breath when you sleep too light, and the way you say thank you like it hurts. She swallowed hard, rain streaming down her cheeks. You'd really do that? I already have, he said, just not on paper. She stepped closer. The storm around them was rising, trees swaying hard, lightning flickering behind the hills. What do you want in return? He looked at her like she'd missed the point entirely. A family that stays. That's all. She said nothing for a long moment. Then she reached for his hand, her fingers cold but certain, and nodded once. Then let's do it before they come again. The wind surged, the barn creaked, and the lean-to gave a single sharp groan, but held. They married the next day under the old oak tree behind the house, with only the preacher and Emma watching. The baby cooed in Thomas's arms, his small hand curled tight around the edge of Thomas's collar like he belonged there. Afterward, Rose stood beside the hearth and watched her name change on the paper. She wasn't sure she felt heavier or lighter, only that something had shifted inside her, like her bones had finally stopped wandering. That evening, as the storm gave way to stars, Emma brought out her drawing again. She added one more figure to the page, a small one nestled between her and Thomas. She held out to him, smiling wide. That's Mama now. That's us. He looked down at it, and for the first time in years, Thomas Rivers smiled like a man who'd found what he didn't know he'd been missing. But the piece was short, 3 days later, another man came. Not a lawman, not a messenger. This one wore black gloves and a silver pocket chain, and he dismounted with the lazy confidence of someone who bought his right to walk anywhere. "Name's Elijah Boone," he said. "Thomas didn't offer his. I come to collect what's mine." "You've come to the wrong place," Thomas said. Boone tilted his head. "You married her, I hear. Fast work." Thomas didn't answer. Boone's eyes drifted toward the house, toward Rose, who'd stepped into the doorway with the baby on her hip, her gaze steady. "You might have bought her name, Rivers, but I've got debt signed in her dead husband's hand, and that little boy's blood's still tied to that debt. You won't touch him." Boone smiled, lazy and mean. "I don't need to. All I need is the courts say so, and they like my say better than yours." Thomas took a step forward. "You want to take something from me? You'd best not miss on the first try." Boone studied him, looked again at Rose, at the girl behind the curtain. Then he smiled, tight and cruel, and turned back toward his horse. "I'll be back," he said, "with a sheriff and with paper." But Thomas didn't look worried, because folded in his back pocket was a marriage certificate, signed and sealed, because 2 days ago he'd ridden into town himself and filed a deed in her name. Because there was one thing Elijah Boone had never counted on, that someone would stand beside her and not leave, not this time. The morning broke clean and gold, as if the storm had scoured the earth and left behind something new. A hush hung over the ranch, soft as a prayer not yet spoken. Snow had dusted the distant hills in the night, but the yard lay dry, hard, packed, waiting. Somewhere beyond the horizon, dust rose in a thin ribbon, the kind kicked up by hooves and lawmen who carried more ink than mercy. Thomas stood at the fence line with his coat open to wind, hammer in one hand, a fresh plank of wood in the other. The nails rested between his teeth, his eyes steady. Rose watched from the porch, Eli warm against her hip, his tiny hand tucked into the fold of her shawl. Emma was beside her, hair braided with blue thread she'd found in an old drawer, the color of hope and stitched promises. The wood Thomas lifted was smooth, sanded flat, pale as new birch. In its center was a name carved slow and deep, Rivers and Rose. The ampersand curved like a vine, tying two lives into one truth. He fixed it to the gatepost without flourish, just a slow, sure rhythm of the hammer, as if the act itself was sacred. By the time he was done, a wagon crested the rise. 2 men rode up, one the sheriff, boots polished and badge gleaming in the cold light, the other Elijah Boone, wrapped in a dark coat and a darker scowl. Boone rode with the easy arrogance of a man who had never once had a knock before walking into someone else's life. They dismounted without asking. Sheriff Halvorsen nodded once, slow and tired. He was older than he looked, and everything about his face said he'd enjoy the errand. "Mornin', Thomas. Mrs. Rivers." Rose inclined her head. She said nothing. Boone stepped forward, clutching a folded paper like a dagger. Here to collect. Property and persons owed. Thomas met him halfway between the house and the gate, arms crossed, feet planted. "You're late." Boone's brow lifted. "How's that?" Thomas reached into his coat and pulled out a matching set of papers, writ official and clean, sealed by Judge Whitley himself. Marriage certificate. Deed transfer. Statement of guardianship over Eli, who now bore the Rivers name. "I filed 2 days before you even got out of bed." Boone unfolded the papers, eyes narrowing with every line. His hand twitched once at the bottom, where the judge's signature glared back like a verdict already passed. "You think this ends it?" "I don't think anything," Thomas said. "I know it." Boone stepped closer, jaw tight. "She still owes." "She doesn't owe you her children," Thomas said, "and you can't own what was never yours." The air went still. The sheriff cleared his throat. "It's done, Boone. Law says it's clean. Judge wouldn't sign it otherwise." Boone didn't move at first, just stood there, face tight with the ugly recognition that money couldn't untie a knot carved in wood and name. Then, with a sneer, he crumpled the letter in his hand and tossed it into the dust. "You'll regret it," he said to Thomas. But Thomas only nodded toward the gate. "Get off my land." The words held no anger, no roar, just a calm finality that turned Boone's face red with something more than cold. He turned, mounted, rode off like a man who'd seen the last door close. The sheriff tipped his hat to Rose. "You've got a good one there, ma'am." Her voice, soft but sure, replied, "I know." When the law was gone and the hoofbeats faded, Rose walked down to the gate. She stood beside Thomas, the snow bright around them. She looked at the sign, at the curve of her name beside his, as if it had always been there waiting. Emma came running with a brush and a pot of dark stain. "Mama," she said, holding it up breathless, "can I help paint it?" Thomas knelt, held the brush steady while her small hand guided it. Stroke by stroke, the name grew darker, bolder, like it had been carved not just in wood, but into the land itself. By afternoon, the house smelled of bread. The baby slept sound, and Emma sang to herself while hanging laundry in the wind. Thomas chopped wood in steady rhythm, and Rose stood beneath the old oak where they'd said vows with no audience but the wind. She didn't feel rescued, didn't feel beholden. She felt chosen. She thought of the night she'd spent with nothing but stars above her, and fear clutched tight to her chest. Thought of her husband's last breath, of the creek grave, of the walk to this place. She thought of that knock on the door. "My daddy died today. Can we sleep in your barn tonight?" And how the words still echoed like the opening line of a story she didn't know she was in. And then she looked toward the fence, where a name caught the light like polished bone. Rivers and Rose. It wasn't just a name. It was a sentence finished. That night, they sat on the porch wrapped in one blanket, the baby in her arms, Emma asleep with charcoal smudges on her hands, and a paper folded beneath her pillow. The stars came out in quiet ceremony. The wind was kind. Thomas spoke low, his voice steady against the hush. "I never thought I'd get another chance." She turned to him. "I never thought I'd be one." He nodded once, like that truth fit, just right. Then he looked out across the land, his land, their land, and spoke not to her, but to the wind, to the past, to anyone listening. "Let it be known, if ever they come a fire in their hands or papers in their mouths, they'll find this fence named, this house full, and this woman not alone." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and for the first time in years, maybe ever, she believed she was home, not just under a roof, but seen, claimed, and finally safe. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell icon so you never miss another tale from the old frontier.